The day I finally confronted my narcissistic father, he started crying, and I realized he broke me worse than I thought. Daryl and I had been dating for 10 months when he asked to borrow my BMW last Wednesday morning. He showed up at my place around 7 o'clock looking all nervous, doing that thing where he runs his hands through his hair when he wants something. He said he needed my car for this big job interview at some insurance office downtown. His Toyota was making weird grinding sounds and he didn't want to risk it breaking down. The job supposedly paid way more than what he was making at Target. I just handed him the keys without thinking about it because I was happy he was finally trying to get a better job. Thursday morning, he texted saying the interview went really well. They wanted him back for another round and could he keep my car one more day. His Toyota was still messed up and the repair place couldn't see it until Friday. I said sure and took the bus to work instead. By Thursday night he was texting me all excited saying they offered him the job, but he had one more meeting to do. Friday he asked to keep my car through the weekend. The insurance place wanted him to go to some team building thing where all the managers would be there. It was at a resort upstate and they were paying for everything. Weekend work stuff seemed weird, but whatever. Maybe that's how insurance companies work. I said okay, even though I was starting to get annoyed about not having my own car. Sunday afternoon I finally pushed back. I had early client meetings Monday and needed reliable transportation. When I texted Daryl about getting my car back, he responded immediately with more details about his situation. The company had been so impressed with his performance that they were flying him out to their corporate retreat location for final interviews with senior partners. It was some exclusive resort where they conducted high business. He promised to be back Tuesday evening at the latest. Something about his whole story was bothering me. Daryl had never talked about applying to insurance places before. He'd been working at Target for 2 years, always complaining about the money, but never actually looking for other jobs that I knew of. And weekend retreats at fancy resorts for insurance job interviews. That seemed really weird, especially for someone going from retail to office work. I opened the BMW Connected Drive app on my phone and checked the GPS location. My car was currently parked at the Ocean View Grand Resort about 3 hours north of the city. The location matched what Daryl had described, which should have been reassuring. Instead, something nagged at me about the name. I'd heard of that resort recently but couldn't place where. Then I remembered Scarlett Morrison, a girl from Daryl's college that I'd seen him exchange Instagram likes with occasionally, had been posting stories from somewhere scenic all weekend. I opened Instagram and scrolled back through her recent posts. Saturday morning showed her at a pool overlooking the ocean. Saturday afternoon featured expensive cocktails against a sunset backdrop. Saturday night was dinner at what looked like an upscale restaurant. Sunday morning she posted a story that made me sick. It showed a set of BMW keys sitting on a marble countertop, photographed from above with perfect lighting. The caption read, "Best boyfriend ever surprised me with this getaway." The key fob in the image was unmistakably mine. I'd scratched my initials into the black leather with a penknife years ago when I first got the car, and the small scar was clearly visible in her photo. I called in sick Monday morning and drove my dad's pickup truck north toward the resort. The 3-hour drive gave me time to process what I discovered. Daryl wasn't at any job interview. He was on a romantic weekend getaway with Scarlett, using my car and apparently my money to finance it. The elaborate story about insurance offices and corporate retreats had been pure fiction designed to keep me from asking questions. The resort looked exactly like it did in Scarlett's Instagram posts, fancy as hell with valet parking and marble everywhere. I found my BMW in the parking lot. Seeing it there being used for someone else's romantic trip made everything feel real in a way the Instagram photos hadn't. I walked into the lobby and spotted them right away through the big windows looking out at the pool. Daryl had his arm around Scarlett and she was taking selfies with the ocean behind them. They were laughing and looked super comfortable together. This definitely wasn't their first time hanging out like this. There was a bar that looked out at the pool area with just glass walls between. I ordered a drink and sat where I could see their table perfectly. The bartender mentioned that Monday afternoons were always dead since most weekend people had already left. Only a few people were still around, which meant I could hear everything they were saying. Scarlett was scrolling through her phone, showing Daryl something that made him grin. Then he pulled out his own phone and started showing her what appeared to be text messages. Their voices carried clearly through the quiet space. "My ex is so pathetic and desperate she'd give me her organs if I asked," Daryl said, holding up his phone so Scarlett could read the screen. "Some people are just born to be used. Watch. I'll text her right now asking for more money and she'll send it without question." Scarlett leaned closer to read whatever he was showing her, then threw her head back, laughing. "You're so bad. Does she really think you love her after all this time?" Daryl shrugged and began typing something on his phone. "She's too stupid to realize I've been using her credit cards to pay for our dates. Hell, I even used her airline miles to book this entire trip. The girl pays for everything and thinks it means we're building a future together." I started recording on my phone the second Daryl mentioned using me. I kept my hand steady and held it under the bar. Everything was coming through crystal clear because it was so quiet and they were sitting pretty close to the glass. Scarlett was loving every detail and kept asking more questions about how long he'd been scamming me and what else he'd gotten away with. Daryl was bragging about expensive dinners where I'd paid, weekend trips where he'd forgotten his wallet, even clothes he'd bought with my credit cards. It was all just a game to him, seeing how much he could get from someone who actually trusted him. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced down to see a message from Daryl asking for $500 for some emergency expense at the retreat. Something about unexpected fees and his card being declined. He needed the money transferred right away or there would be problems with the company. He was literally texting me for money while sitting 20 feet away, calling me pathetic to another woman. I watched him show Scarlett the message before hitting send. Both of them dissolving into laughter at my expense. She made some comment about my gullibility while he predicted exactly how quickly I'd respond with the requested funds. See, like clockwork, he told her. She'll have it transferred to my account within the hour. Never asked questions, never suspects anything. I finished my drink, left money on the bar, and walked out. My dad's truck started up fine and I drove home without saying a word the whole way. 3 hours gave me a lot of time to think about what I just heard. Daryl had no clue I'd been there or that I knew the truth about his fake job interview. He thought he was so smart and that I'd never figure it out. Tuesday morning, Daryl texted saying he was coming home. He'd gotten the job and wanted to celebrate with me that night. I texted back all excited telling him how proud I was and how much I missed him during his business trip. That night I pulled out 10 months of receipts and bank statements and spread them all over my dining room table. Once I knew what to look for, the pattern was super obvious. Restaurant bills where I'd paid even though he said he'd get it. Shopping trips where my card got used for men's clothes. Concert tickets bought on my account for shows I never went to. Gas charges when I was out of town. Movie tickets for two when I'd been working late. My credit card statements made it even clearer. Purchases at stores I'd never been to. Charges at restaurants when I could prove I was somewhere else. Stuff bought that never showed up at my place. He'd been using my accounts for months, paying for not just our dates but apparently his whole social life. I'd already decided exactly what I was going to do to make him regret every single word he'd said about me at that resort. First update, guys. I cannot believe what happened when I confronted this lying man. First off, thank you to everyone who commented on my last post telling me to record everything. That advice literally saved my ass and you'll see why in a minute. So when Daryl came over all excited about his fake job, I had everything ready. All those receipts spread across my dining room table, my phone with a recording queued up, and honestly I was vibrating with rage but trying to play it cool. He walks in with this massive grin, talking about how we should go celebrate at that expensive steakhouse downtown, and how this new job was going to change everything for us. I told him to sit down because we needed to talk. The second his eyes hit those credit card statements, his whole face changed, like watching someone realize they just stepped in quicksand. But instead of coming clean, this absolute tried to double down on his great story. He starts going off about how those charges were all legitimate, how he'd been planning to pay me back once his first paycheck came in, how his new job had these weird expense policies that required employees to front their own money. I'm sitting there listening to him pile lie on top of lie. And I'm like, does he actually think I'm this stupid? So I played the recording, the entire thing, all 15 minutes of him and Scarlett laughing about how pathetic and desperate I am. How I'd give him my organs if he asked, how he's been using my credit cards for months. The part about using my airline miles for their romantic getaway, everything. You should have seen his face when he heard his own voice calling me too stupid to realize what he was doing. It was like watching someone's soul leave their body in real time. But instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, know what this psychopath did. He got angry at me for recording him. He starts screaming about how I violated his privacy. How I had no right to spy on him. How recording someone without consent is illegal. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? You steal my money in my car for a secret weekend with another woman and you're the victim here. But it gets so much worse. He tried to convince me that everything I heard was taken out of context. That he and Scarlett were just joking around. The guys sometimes say stupid to impress girls? That he never actually meant any of it? The gaslighting was insane. He kept saying I was being paranoid and dramatic. That I was twisting his words to fit some crazy narrative I'd made up in my head. When I brought up Scarlett's Instagram story with my car keys, he claimed she must have grabbed them as a joke for the photo. When I asked about all the charges on my credit cards for places I'd never been, he said those were work expenses he'd forgotten to mention. For every single piece of evidence I had, he had some stupid explanation ready. The conversation went on for almost 3 hours. 3 hours of him trying to convince me that black was white and up was down. He kept switching between being defensive and trying to be sweet, telling me how much he loved me and how hurt he was that I didn't trust him. At one point he actually started crying, saying I was destroying the best relationship he'd ever had over a misunderstanding. But here's where it gets really twisted. Around midnight, he finally admits that maybe he said some things he shouldn't have, but only because Scarlett had been pressuring him to badmouth me. Apparently, she's been jealous of our relationship and kept trying to get him to admit I was controlling and clingy. So, according to Daryl, he was just telling her what she wanted to hear to keep the peace during their work retreat. I asked him why the hell he'd need to keep the peace with some random girl from college during his job interview. That's when more truth started coming out. Turns out Scarlett works at some company and had supposedly recommended him for a position there. The resort weekend wasn't with his new job at all. It was some networking event for young professionals that Scarlett had invited him to. But even that was because when I pressed him for details about this job, he couldn't give me anything concrete. No company name, no job description, no interview dates, just vague nonsense about opportunities and how connections matter more than experience. Finally, around 2 o'clock in the morning, I told him I was done listening to his lies. I wanted my car keys back immediately, and I wanted him to transfer money back to my account to cover all those fraudulent charges. That's when he completely lost it and showed me who he really was. He starts yelling about how I'm the one using him, how he's been doing me favors by dating someone like me, how I should be grateful he even wants to be seen with me in public. Real charming stuff. He said I was lucky to have a guy who was willing to let me pay for things since most men would never put up with a controlling girl who keeps receipts and spies on her boyfriend. The verbal abuse went on for another hour. Every insecurity I'd ever shared with him. Every vulnerable moment from our 10 months together, he weaponized all of it. Called me clingy, desperate, pathetic. Said I was so afraid of being alone that I'd pay any amount to keep a man around. He said the only reason he stayed with me as long as he did was because I made his life easier and more comfortable. But the thing that really got to me was when he said I'd never find anyone else who would put up with me, that I was damaged goods and should stop pretending I deserved better treatment. That normal women don't keep spreadsheets of their boyfriend's spending or follow them around with GPS apps. By 4 in the morning I was completely drained, but also crystal clear about what needed to happen. I told him he had until Friday to pay me back every penny he'd stolen or I'd be taking legal action. He laughed and said good luck proving anything since he could claim all those purchases were gifts or expenses I'd agreed to cover. He finally left around sunrise, but not before informing me that he'd be keeping my car until Sunday since his Toyota still wasn't fixed and he had important meetings all week. Just walked out with my keys like he owned the damn thing. The absolute audacity of this man thinking he could continue using my stuff after everything that happened. But joke's on him because I'd already planned for this exact scenario. Remember how I mentioned my dad's pickup truck? Well, Dad works for the county sheriff's department. Not as a deputy, but he's been doing their fleet maintenance for 22 years. He knows every cop, detective, and administrator in the building. When I called him Thursday morning and explained the situation, he didn't even hesitate. Turns out when someone takes your car without permission and refuses to return it, that's called theft. Doesn't matter if you initially gave them the keys or if you're dating, once they refuse to give it back, it becomes a crime. Dad helped me file a report Thursday afternoon and explained exactly what would happen next. Friday morning around 10 o'clock, Daryl's probably sitting in some coffee shop or wherever the hell he goes during the day when 2 deputies roll up and inform him that the BMW he's driving was reported stolen. Can you imagine his face when he realized I wasn't bluffing about taking legal action? But wait, there's more. When they searched him before taking him in, guess what they found in his wallet? 2 of my credit cards that he'd somehow gotten copies of, cards I never gave him, never authorized him to use, never even knew he had. The theft charges just got a whole lot more serious. I'm sitting here typing this while looking at 17 missed calls and about 40 text messages from Daryl's phone. Haven't read them yet, but I can see from the previews that he's absolutely losing his mind, going from begging to threatening to trying to negotiate. The cherry on top. Scarlett posted an Instagram story this morning from what looks like a police station parking lot with the caption, "Worst Monday ever." Some people are actually psycho. Looks like she got dragged into this mess too, when they needed to verify his story about the weekend. I know some of you are going to say, I went too far, but honestly, for that noise. This man stole from me for months, lied to my face repeatedly, used my car for a romantic getaway with another woman, called me pathetic and desperate. Behind my back, and then had the nerve to verbally abuse me when confronted with evidence of his crimes. Actions have consequences, and maybe next time he'll think twice before targeting someone he assumes is too weak or stupid to fight back. But this saga isn't over yet, because now I have to deal with his family blowing up my phone, asking me to drop the charges. Second update. Oh my god, you guys. The drama that has unfolded since my last post is absolutely cinema. I thought having Daryl arrested was going to be the end of it. But apparently that was just the beginning of this nightmare. His entire family has declared war on me and the level of manipulation and guilt-tripping is honestly impressive in the worst possible way. So first let me tell you about those 17 missed calls I mentioned. I finally listened to them and this man went through every stage of grief in the span of 6 hours. Started with confusion and hurt, moved to anger and threats, then bargaining and promises, and finally just straight up sobbing and begging. The progression was actually kind of fascinating to watch if it wasn't so pathetic. The first few messages were him trying to convince me this was all a huge misunderstanding, that he was just borrowing my car and had every intention of returning it, that the credit cards thing was complicated, but he could explain everything if I just bailed him out. Classic Daryl, thinking he could talk his way out of anything with enough and charm. By message number 8 he was getting nasty, telling me I was being vindictive and cruel, that I was destroying his life over petty relationship drama, that I was too immature to handle adult problems and was running to daddy to solve my problems for me. Real rich coming from someone who literally stole my money to impress another woman. But okay, Daryl. The last few messages were just pure desperation, crying, saying he loved me more than anything, that Scarlett meant nothing to him and he was just trying to network for his career, that he'd never forgive himself if I didn't give him another chance. The manipulation was so obvious, but part of me felt bad listening to someone I'd cared about completely fall apart. But then his mother called me Connie. I'd met her maybe 3 times in 10 months, and she'd always been polite but distant. Now suddenly she's calling me at 7 a.m. sobbing about how I'm ruining her baby boy's life over nothing. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours because Connie is one of those people who won't let you get a word in, but also expects you to respond to everything she says. She kept going on about how Daryl made a mistake, but doesn't deserve to have his whole future destroyed. How he's been struggling since his dad died 5 years ago and sometimes makes poor decisions when he's stressed or confused. I tried explaining that this wasn't just a mistake, that he'd been stealing from me for months while lying to my face and humiliating me behind my back. But Connie kept interrupting with more excuses. He's young and stupid. Boys mature slower than girls. He comes from a broken home. He's never been good with money. The job market is hard. And he was just trying to impress the wrong people. Every single thing I brought up, she had some justification for the credit card charges. He probably thought I wouldn't mind since we were in a serious relationship. The lies about the job interview. He was embarrassed about his real situation and didn't want to disappoint me. The recording of him calling me pathetic. He was just venting to a friend and didn't mean any of it. But the worst part was when she started crying and talking about how this arrest could ruin his chances of ever getting a decent job. How he'd end up stuck at Target forever or worse. How he might turn to drugs or crime if he couldn't find legitimate work. She painted this picture of her son becoming a complete failure because I was too stubborn to forgive one little mistake. Then she dropped the guilt bomb about how his dad would be so disappointed if he could see what was happening. About how she'd already lost her husband and couldn't bear to lose her son too. How she'd worked 2 jobs to put Daryl through college and this was going to make all that sacrifice meaningless. By the end of the call I was actually starting to feel guilty, which is insane when you think about it. This woman had me questioning whether I was overreacting to being stolen from and cheated on. The manipulation was so smooth and emotional that for a hot minute, I wondered if maybe I should just drop the charges and move on. But then Wednesday his sister Emily started texting me. Where Connie was all tears and emotional manipulation, Emily went straight for the jugular with pure aggression and threats. She told me I was a psycho who was trying to destroy an innocent man because I couldn't handle being dumped. That everyone in their family knew I was crazy and controlling, and they'd been waiting for Daryl to wise up and leave me. The texts just kept coming all day. Emily telling me that Daryl had confided in her about how suffocating our relationship was, how I monitored his spending and tracked his location like some kind of stalker, how he'd been planning to break up with me for weeks, but was afraid of how I'd react. According to her, the weekend with Scarlett was his way of finally building up the courage to end things with me. She said I was exactly the type of vengeful ex who ruins men's lives when they try to leave, and that she'd make sure everyone in town knew what kind of person I really was. That she'd blast my business on social media and tell everyone I was a lying, manipulative girl who couldn't handle rejection. The threats escalated throughout the day. She was going to call my work and tell them I was unstable. She was going to post my personal information online. She was going to show up at my apartment and confront me face to face. Real mature stuff from a 26-year-old woman defending her criminal brother. Thursday morning I got a call from their Uncle Donald, who apparently is some kind of family mediator, because he called himself trying to negotiate a peaceful resolution. This man spent 45 minutes trying to convince me that everyone makes mistakes and the important thing was finding a way forward that didn't destroy Daryl's future. Donald kept emphasizing how young people today don't understand the seriousness of their actions, how social media and dating apps have made relationships more casual and confusing. He suggested that maybe what happened was just a miscommunication about boundaries and expectations rather than deliberate theft and betrayal. He offered to have Daryl pay me back in installments and do some kind of community service instead of facing criminal charges. Kept talking about restorative justice and how punishment should be about making things right rather than revenge. The whole conversation felt like he was trying to negotiate a business deal rather than addressing the fact that his nephew is a lying thief. But here's where things got really twisted. During our conversation, Donald let slip that this isn't the first time they've had to clean up Daryl's messes. Apparently, when he was in college, he got caught using his roommate's credit card for pizza and video games, but the family convinced the guy not to press charges. And 2 years ago, he borrowed money from his grandmother for rent and never paid it back. But she wrote it off because family is family. So this pattern of taking advantage of people who trust him isn't new. His family has been enabling this behavior for years by making excuses and cleaning up his messes instead of letting him face consequences. And now they're trying to do the same thing with me. The most infuriating part is how they keep framing this as me being the unreasonable one. Like I'm some heartless girl who's destroying a good man over a simple misunderstanding. They've completely flipped the script to make Daryl the victim and me the villain in this story. Friday afternoon, Connie called me again, this time with a different approach. She wanted to know if there was anything she could do to make this right, any way to compensate me for the money without involving the police. She offered to pay me back herself if I would just drop the charges against her son. We talked for over an hour about what that would look like. She wanted to set up a payment plan where she'd give me $500 a month until everything was covered. She also offered to make Daryl write me a formal apology and promised never to contact me again. She thought she was being generous and reasonable. But when I told her the total amount he'd stolen was over $4,000, her tune changed completely. Suddenly, she was asking for receipts and proof, questioning whether all those charges were really unauthorized. She wanted to know if maybe some of that money was spent on things for both of us, or if I was inflating the numbers to make Daryl look worse. The conversation turned nasty when I refused to negotiate. She started accusing me of being motivated by spite rather than justice, of wanting to see her son suffer just because he hurt my feeling. She said I was being selfish by not considering how this would affect their whole family, not just Daryl. By the end, she was yelling about how I obviously never cared about Daryl at all if I was willing to destroy his life like this. That a woman who truly loved someone would find a way to work things out instead of running to the police the first time there was trouble in paradise. The manipulation and gaslighting from his entire family has been relentless. They're tag-teaming me with phone calls, texts, and social media messages, all designed to make me feel guilty for holding their precious baby boy accountable for his actions. It's like they all got together and decided the best strategy was to overwhelm me until I caved. But you know what? All this pressure from his family is just confirming that I made the right decision. They're literally trying to convince me that stealing from someone you claim to love is no big deal. That lying and cheating are just mistakes that boys make, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to pay for some loser's lifestyle. The prosecutor called me this morning to discuss the case and let me know they found even more evidence when they searched Daryl's stuff. Apparently, he had photos on his phone of my credit cards, which explains how he got the numbers. They also found text messages between him and Scarlett planning their weekend getaway, including discussions about how much money they could spend and what lies to tell me. But here's the kicker. They also found messages with other people. Turns out this whole time I thought Scarlett was just some random college friend, but she's actually been his on and off girlfriend for the past year. The prosecutor showed me messages going back to last February where they're talking about being in love and planning a future together. So not only was Daryl stealing my money and using me for financial support, he was maintaining an entire parallel relationship the whole time we were together. I wasn't just being cheated on, I was literally the other woman in my own relationship without even knowing it. Now his family is calling me nonstop because they found out about the additional evidence and they're panicking. Last update, I cannot even begin to describe the absolute meltdown that happened when Daryl's family found out about the year-long relationship with Scarlett. Remember how they were all calling me crazy and vindictive for pressing charges over a simple mistake? Well, turns out their precious baby boy is an even bigger clown than any of us realized. So Saturday morning, Connie calls me sobbing. But this time it's different. She's not trying to guilt-trip me or negotiate. She's genuinely devastated because the prosecutor showed them all the evidence. The photos of my credit cards, the messages with Scarlett going back over a year, the detailed planning of their romantic getaways using my money, everything. Connie kept saying she had no idea that Daryl had told the whole family I was just some girl he was casually seeing while he figured out his real relationship with Scarlett. Can you believe that trash? For 10 months I thought we were building something serious together, and he was telling his family I was just a casual hookup he was using for money. She was crying about how embarrassed and ashamed she felt, how she'd been defending someone who was living a complete lie. But then she started asking me questions that made my blood boil all over again. She wanted to know if I'd suspected anything, if there were signs she should have picked up on, if maybe I'd ignored red flags because I was desperate for a relationship. Even when she was supposedly on my side, Connie couldn't help but find ways to make it partially my fault. Like maybe if I'd been more attentive or suspicious, I could have prevented her son from being such a manipulative The victim blaming was unreal. But the conversation got cut short because my mom walked in and heard Connie crying over speakerphone about her poor baby boy. My mom had been watching this whole situation unfold, and she was not having any of this manipulation game. She grabbed the phone from me and told Connie exactly what she thought about a family that raises their son to steal from women and then attacks the victims when they fight back. My mom has never been one to sugarcoat things, and she let Connie have it about enabling criminal behavior instead of teaching basic human decency. Connie tried to pull the same sob story routine on my mom that she'd been using on me, talking about Daryl's difficult childhood and how young men make mistakes, but my mom shut that down immediately. She told Connie that she'd raised 2 kids as a single parent after my dad got laid off when I was 12 and somehow managed to do it without turning either of us into lying thieves. The conversation escalated fast because my mom was furious about everything this family had put me through. She told Connie that calling their daughter names and making threats was absolutely unacceptable, that no decent family would respond to their son's crimes by attacking his victim. My mom also brought up something I hadn't even thought about. How this whole situation was affecting my family's reputation and stress levels. She'd been losing sleep worrying about me, had to take time off work to help me deal with everything, and was sick of watching me get harassed by people who should be ashamed of themselves. When Connie tried to suggest that maybe both families could work together to find a solution that didn't involve the courts, my mom laughed in her face. She told Connie that the time for family mediation was before her son decided to commit multiple felonies, not after he got caught. The call ended with my mom telling Connie that if anyone from their family contacted me again, she'd be filing harassment charges on top of everything else. That they'd had their chance to raise their son right and they'd failed, and now they could deal with the consequences of that failure. After she hung up, my mom sat me down for our own long conversation about everything that had happened. She'd been biting her tongue for weeks because she didn't want to influence my decisions, but she was proud of me for standing up for myself instead of letting people walk all over me. My dad came home while we were talking and joined the conversation. He was still angry about having to watch his daughter get victimized by someone she'd trusted, but he was also proud that I'd had the courage to fight back instead of just accepting the abuse. But the real drama started when Emily showed up at my apartment Sunday afternoon. Not threatening or aggressive this time. She looked like she'd been crying for hours and could barely make eye contact with me. She kept apologizing for the things she'd said, for calling me crazy and psychotic, for defending Daryl when she should have known better. We ended up talking for 4 hours because once Emily started opening up about their family dynamics, she couldn't stop. She told me about how they'd always made excuses for Daryl's behavior. How whenever he got in trouble, they'd blame external factors instead of holding him accountable. She said she'd always had doubts about some of his stories, but never questioned them because keeping family peace was more important than finding out uncomfortable truths. Like when he'd come home with expensive clothes or electronics that he claimed were gifts from friends, or when he'd borrow money from their grandmother and then never mention paying it back. Emily admitted she'd suspected something was wrong with our relationship because Daryl never seemed invested in it, the way she'd expect from someone planning a serious future. He'd make jokes about my clingy behavior and laugh about how I always wanted to pay for everything, but she'd assumed that was just normal. Relationship complaining. She was crying, talking about how guilty she felt for participating in their family's pattern of attacking Daryl's girlfriends whenever problems came up. How they'd automatically assumed the girls were being dramatic or vindictive instead of considering that maybe Daryl was actually in the wrong. But then Emily dropped an even bigger bomb. She'd visited Daryl in jail and confronted him about everything, demanding he tell her the truth about our relationship and what he'd really been doing for the past year. She said Daryl showed no remorse whatsoever when talking to family. He was angry about getting caught, frustrated that his plans with Scarlett were ruined, and resentful that I'd had the nerve to fight back instead of just accepting the breakup quietly. He told Emily that I was exactly the type of desperate woman who deserved to be taken advantage of because I was too needy and insecure to demand better treatment. That he'd done me a favor by staying with me as long as he did, since most guys would have run away from someone so clingy and controlling. The thing that hurt most was learning how he described intimate moments we'd shared to his family. Private conversations where I'd opened up about my fears and insecurities, he'd turned into evidence of my mental instability. Times when I'd been vulnerable and honest with him, he'd used to convince his family that I was the problem in our relationship. He'd painted me as this obsessive, possessive girlfriend who monitored his every move and demanded constant attention. According to his version of events, the credit card usage was me forcing him to let me pay for things so I could hold it over his head later. The car borrowing was me being controlling about his transportation options. Hearing how he'd twisted our entire relationship into this narrative where I was the abusive one and he was the victim was absolutely devastating. But it also made me realize how calculated everything had been from the beginning. He'd been building this version of events for months, probably planning to use it as justification when he finally decided to leave me for Scarlett. Monday morning, the prosecutor called with an update on the case. They'd offered Daryl a plea deal that would involve him paying back everything he stole, plus penalties, doing community service, and staying away from me completely. But he'd rejected it because he still insisted he hadn't done anything criminal. His lawyer was apparently trying to argue that everything was consensual because we were in a relationship, that I'd given him permission to use my accounts and never explicitly revoked that permission. They wanted to frame the whole thing as a civil matter between exartners rather than criminal theft. The prosecutor said cases like this were tricky because proving intent to steal in romantic relationships could be challenging, but the recording I'd made at the resort was crucial evidence because it showed Daryl's true mindset and intentions. His own words about using me and targeting my vulnerabilities would be nearly impossible for his lawyer to explain away. Then Donald called me one final time, but his whole approach had completely changed. No more talk about family mediation or restorative justice. He was genuinely desperate and wanted to know what it would take for me to accept a settlement and drop the criminal charges. He offered to pay back double what Daryl had stolen, plus cover any therapy costs or other expenses related to what their family had put me through. He wanted to write a formal apology on behalf of the entire family and promised that none of them would ever contact me again. But when I asked why they were suddenly so eager to settle, Donald admitted that Daryl's case was attracting attention they didn't want. Apparently, some of the details had gotten out and people in their social circle were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about their family. The conversation got heated when I refused to consider any deal that involved dropping the charges. Donald couldn't understand why I wouldn't just take their money and move on, why I was insisting on destroying Daryl's future when they were offering to make me financially whole. I told him that money was never the point. The point was ensuring that someone who'd spent months manipulating and stealing from me faced real consequences for those actions. That their family's first instinct being to cover everything up and protect their reputation was exactly the problem. Donald got angry and accused me of being vindictive and unforgiving, saying I was letting my hurt feelings cloud my judgment about what was best for everyone involved. He suggested that maybe I should think about what kind of person I wanted to be, someone who showed mercy and understanding, or someone who destroyed lives out of spite. I told him I'd already shown what kind of person I was, someone who refused to be victimized and manipulated by people who thought they could get away with it. That if Daryl's life was destroyed, it was because of choices he made, not because of my reaction to those choices. The call ended with Donald making one last desperate attempt to change my mind. He said he'd heard I was a good person from Daryl's stories about our relationship, that I had a kind heart and wouldn't want to see someone's family suffer because of their loved one's mistakes, but I was done caring about their feelings or their family suffering. They'd had every opportunity to raise their son to respect other people and their property. And they'd failed. They'd had months to notice something was wrong when their unemployed son was suddenly living a lifestyle he couldn't afford. And they'd chosen not to ask questions. Wednesday morning I got one final text from Daryl himself. Just 8 words. You destroyed everything we could have had together. Like even facing felony charges, he still couldn't acknowledge what he'd actually done wrong. Still convinced that I was the problem and he was some tragic victim of my vindictive nature. I blocked his number without responding because honestly, what was there left to say? This man had shown me exactly who he was through his actions, his lies, and his complete inability to take responsibility for the pain he'd caused. The case is moving forward without any deals or settlements. Daryl will face trial for theft, fraud, and whatever other charges the prosecutor decides to file. His family can deal with the embarrassment and social consequences of having raised someone who preys on women who trust him. So that's it, Reddit. Watching him realize that I wasn't the desperate pushover he thought I was, that I had enough self-respect to hold him accountable for his actions regardless of how much it hurt. That was the moment his fantasy world completely collapsed. And honestly, it felt amazing.